Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, from time to time, I like to take a look at the statistics and the demographics and all kinds of information that is made available to people with YouTube channels to tell you more about your audience, what their interests are, what's bringing them back, what makes your channel popular. And right now, if you look at the top 5 most popular videos on this channel over the last month, 2 of them involve Ben Shapiro, and the other 3 involve some sort of a top 10 list. So those are obviously things you guys like to see more of. So while I try to cover a variety of topics, I also, in some sense, need to cater to the audience, and I need to make videos that people are going to click on, because that's how we grow the channel and we get new people involved and interested in history. So with that in mind, we're going back to WatchMojo.com. Now, I understand they tend to be very surface-y and very kind of pop culture-y, but I still think a video like the one we're going to take a look at today can give us some interesting insights into parts of history maybe we don't talk a lot about. And with that in mind, we're going to take a look at the top 10 important historical events you've never heard of. I have no idea what they're going to cover in this video. I intentionally don't look at those sorts of things. If I do see something on a video, or I have watched a video before, when I react to it, I do tell you guys that, so you're aware of it. And I want to give a shout out and a thank you to John in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. John Valenti, thank you so much for your support on the channel through Patreon. Couldn't do it without you. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and dive into this one today. As always, the link is in the description to the original content.
In Sudan, in fact, there are more pyramids than in Egypt. And this is a thing that people don't think of very often.
Welcome to WatchMojo. And today, we're examining 10 important historical events you've never heard of.
Zimmerman telegram.
I got hit like everybody else that spoke the language here.
For this list, we'll be looking at the most interesting or significant historical events that are not widely known.
Sultana.
Which of these do you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comments below. The Late Bronze Age collapse.
Between 3,300 and 1,200 BCE, some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen rose to power.
This great upheaval in the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East lasted about a half a century, from around 1200 to 1150 BCE. For reasons that are still ambiguous, the structures of society collapsed, and numerous empires of the time were weakened or outright destroyed.
Basically, everything that had been good and great about the previous era now disappears.
Vast interconnected civilizations disintegrated into isolated villages, ushering in the Greek Dark Ages. It wasn't until about 750 BCE, some 400 years after the collapse, that these Dark Ages came to an end. No one knows why civilizations in the region fell apart, but it was likely a perfect storm of debilitating factors, including natural disasters, economic disruptions, and invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples.
The Sea People were a multi-ethnic group working together to attack the great civilizations of the day. And as more and more destroyed sites are uncovered, the scale of the attacks is staggering.
Nellie Bly.
So that's one of several times in history we've seen things like that happen. There's the one I've referred to in other videos called the 42K event. In other words, about 4,200 years ago, there was something like that happened, where civilizations all over the world, not just in the Eastern Mediterranean, but literally all over the world, all kind of collapsed at about the same time. It just goes to show that there's so much we still don't know about history, and there's still things that we will uncover as archaeology continues to progress. There have been, just in the last 100 years in that part of the world, a lot of archaeological finds that we've made that have confirmed things that we thought maybe were true, or we thought maybe were just myth and legend, and turned out to actually be true, that have helped us see history more accurately, and that's going to continue to happen. I'm going to try to let each one of these 10 play all the way through before I stop and give my comments about them.
Circumnavigates the globe. Writing under the pen name Nellie Bly in the late 19th century, journalist Elizabeth Cochran was a trailblazer who exposed the mistreatment of women in American factories and asylums.
These women are not insane. Most have been made crazier by this place.
While writing for the New York World in the late 1800s, Bly was inspired by Jules Verne's iconic adventure novel Around the World in 80 Days to attempt her own ambitious trip around the globe.
Circling the globe. This is going to be rather amusing.
Her progress became a national sensation, with Bly providing updates via telegraph. She broke the world record by circumnavigating the globe in just 72 days. Bly would later publish her personal account in the book, Around the World in 72 Days.
It's a pretty cool event that I really don't know anything about. We talk a lot about people achieving things like that, like Magellan attempting to circumnavigate the Earth by ship. Of course, Charles Lindbergh making the first solo flight across the Atlantic. And then in the 1930s, you have very famously the situation with, oh my gosh, how am I not thinking of her name at the moment? Flying around the world and then getting lost in the last kind of home leg of that journey. The problem with doing these reactions where you don't have a script and you're doing everything off the top of your head is sometimes, especially once you get into your 40s and your mind starts to not work as well as it did a decade or two earlier, and I'm not claiming I'm old. I get it. It's only going to get worse, but it does happen. Amelia Earhart is who I was trying to think of. We praise these moments when people do that stuff, but this is not one, Nellie Bly, that we talk a lot about. But I'm glad to see that it got press at the time, and I'm sure because she was trying to shine a light on more serious issues, anything that would get her name in the papers and make her popular, I'm sure she probably saw that as an opportunity then to shine a light on those more serious issues.
Zimmerman telegram.
This one I think everybody knows about, right?
Just a few months before the U.S. entered World War I, German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman sent his now famous telegram. The message was intended for Heinrich von Eckart, a German ambassador who was stationed in Mexico.
Conversations with German attachés frequently took place in Chapultepec, often criticizing America and discussing how the two countries could form closer ties.
The coded telegram instructed von Eckart to propose an alliance with Mexico should the United States enter World War I.
We make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis: make war together, make peace together.
If they accepted, Mexico would be given territory that had previously been taken from them by the U.S., the states of Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Como México perdió la mitad de su territorio a los Estados Unidos en una guerra injusta, siempre hubo un resentimiento enorme contra los Estados Unidos.
However, British intelligence intercepted and decoded the telegram, which spurred American public support for the war. Without the Zimmerman telegram, World War I may have turned out very differently.
I wouldn't go quite that far to say World War I might have turned out differently, but a couple of things about the Zimmerman telegram. Number one, if you're Germany, this makes complete sense to do this. If you're worried that the United States is getting involved, and by this point there's starting to be more public outcry in the United States because of things that had happened with unrestricted submarine warfare previously, and in January of 1917, Germany's about to resume unrestricted submarine warfare, which is basically them attempting to counter the effects of the Allied blockade of German ports. And so it makes sense then to look at Mexico. Just a couple of years earlier, back in the earlier part of that same decade, there had been some military action on the border with Mexico and the United States. There's something called the Mexican Punitive Expedition, where John Pershing, who's about to become the American Expeditionary Forces commander, actually, in 1917, he's about to be given that job. He leads this expedition into Mexico to capture this guy Pancho Villa, who's launched raids into the United States. There's been civil war in Mexico. This is only 70 years or so after a lot of the southwest part of the United States has been taken from Mexico, purchased kind of in the aftermath of the Mexican-American War. So there's all sorts of reasons why you could see that Mexico would be on board with this. And the problem was that German direct communication with North America had been cut during the war. And so they were piggybacking off of British lines of communication. So the British were intercepting all this stuff. And the British intercept this message. They give it to the Allies, or to the Americans, knowing that it's going to help get the Americans off the fence, because Russia's falling out of the war at this point. The British would very much like to have the United States come in on the Allied side. And when this is made public, Germany's like, yeah, we sent it. Like, they don't even attempt to deny it. They don't even attempt to try to explain it. They just acknowledge it to be true. And it becomes one of those catalysts that get the American people off the fence and in favor of going to war against Germany.
Claudette Colvin.
Most people ask me, weren't you afraid? Well, I was a teenager. I was afraid, but I was more angry at these white pensioners.
Everyone has heard of Rosa Parks. A defining symbol of the civil rights movement, Parks famously refused to vacate her seat on a Montgomery bus. But she wasn't the first. 9 months earlier, in March of 1955, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat to a white woman and was arrested.
And I felt like this is my time to take a stand for justice.
Colvin became one of several plaintiffs to challenge Montgomery's bus segregation laws. She and civil rights attorney Fred Gray were successful in their challenge, and the city was ordered to end bus segregation. However, civil rights campaigners didn't publicize her story because she was unmarried and pregnant, and thought that Rosa Parks, the secretary of the local NAACP chapter, made a more agreeable public face.
I just wanted people to come together and unify and fight this segregation.
First of all, good for her. A 15-year-old pregnant girl making that stand, good for her. I get why they did that, especially in the 1950s. The unfortunate reality is that when you are trying to fight for equal rights, as in these situations, any weapon that you give your opponents to use against you hurts your cause. And that's wrong, and it shouldn't be that way. And it should not be the case that just because she was 15, unmarried, and pregnant, that means somehow she couldn't be an icon of the civil rights movement. But you have to understand the time and place and the mindset and the caution with which they had to do this. So I understand why they did that, but I agree. Her story should be more widely known, and there are probably other stories like that of people making those kinds of stands that we've never heard about. It's just the reality, unfortunately.
Sultana Explosion. It remains the worst maritime disaster in American history.
Yep.
But few people today have ever even heard of it. In 1865, the steamboat Sultana sank on the Mississippi River when 3 of its 4 boilers exploded.
The initial explosion blew a hole 25 to 30 feet wide through all 3 upper decks, wiping out most of the main cabin.
Designed to carry 376 people, the Sultana was instead carrying 2,128, most of them paroled Union prisoners. 1,167 perished in the accident.
Frantic screams as many slid into the fire. Wails and cries could be heard as the steamboat began sinking.
The captain was among the dead, and the military was reluctant to go after the officers responsible, so no one was ever held accountable. The event was sandwiched right between Lincoln's assassination and the end of the Civil War, so it didn't receive much attention in the press.
It eventually made news, though this newspaper shows it was buried pages behind the coverage of Lincoln. And after that, it was quickly forgotten.
So that's on the Mississippi River. There's a lot of guys that survived Andersonville. If you're not familiar with the story of Andersonville, I did a video there. It was one of my earliest on-site videos that I've done, so I'll put a link up at the end of the video as well as down in the description if you want to check out and hear the story of Andersonville. A lot of these guys are from Andersonville. They survived those horrors only to die on the Sultana. I'm in the process of writing a book on the 20th Ohio Infantry, and a lot of those guys from the 20th Ohio who survived the whole war end up dying on the Sultana. It's a horrible disaster. It's something we still probably don't know nearly enough about exactly what caused it and exactly why it was so bad. But 1,100 guys dying in that scenario is pretty awful stuff.
Wall riots. In the 1960s, police raids on gay bars were common.
You know the drill, huh? IDs, please. Get in the line up against the walls.
This will all be over in a second.
But in 1969, when police raided New York's Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village and became violent, people fought back.
Why are you all just standing there? Help me!
Police soon lost control of the situation, and several riots occurred over the next few nights. This one event sparked a national rebellion, and many LGBT activist groups were soon fighting for their rights. To mark the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall incident, major cities across the country took part in the very first Pride March. Today, it's considered a watershed moment in LGBT rights, and the Stonewall Inn has been made a National Historic Landmark.
Through the Stonewall riots, the gay rights movement gained mainstream visibility and a momentum that continues to this day.
The Los Angeles...
So it's pretty amazing that you think that just back a few decades that even just the act of being gay would be something that would be considered illegal. I don't know the details. I don't know if there was a specific justification that the police had in this scenario that allowed them to raid it, or if they were just raiding it for that reason. I'm guessing maybe they used some other excuse like drugs or something in the midst of all that. I don't know, though. I just don't know enough about it. But, this is also at the time period when guys like Alan Turing in the UK, he was being forced into sterilization for being gay. So, boy, the 60s, especially 68, 69 in that time, we're in the middle, speaking of United States history, we're in the middle of the Vietnam War. We've had a president assassinated in 63. His brother gets assassinated in 68. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in 68. You have the moon landings in 69. You've got all of this stuff happening at one time. You've still got a lot of racial tension going on. Whew, what a time to be alive. And I don't mean that as a positive.
Chinatown Massacre of 1871.
A forgotten history remembered here at the Chinese American Museum in downtown LA.
Only a few of the documented racial massacres in American history have become common knowledge. In late October of 1871, a shootout between rival Chinese organizations left a local policeman and farmer dead. As rumors spread and exaggerated events, an angry mob of white and Hispanic Americans descended on LA's old Chinatown neighborhood. The violence that followed saw the mob assaulting residents and lynching them. 19 Chinese immigrants were killed. Their bodies hung in the street.
The 19 that were killed during the massacre represented 10% of all the Chinese living in Los Angeles.
No one was punished for the attack, as those who were sentenced to prison terms had their convictions successfully overturned on appeal. Canada.
So yeah, there's a lot of anti-Chinese immigration happening in the western United States at this time, and you even have the U.S. is going to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is going to limit a lot of that immigration from happening. Chinese people were very much seen as second-class citizens in the Old West at that time, and it's unfortunate that that sort of thing happened, but much like what was happening for Black Americans in the South at the same time, Chinese Americans are experiencing that same sort of thing in the West.
Residential school system. It's only recently that Canada's residential school system has made its way into mainstream conversation.
That's true.
I was imprisoned here. I was put here. And I did my time.
Beginning in
Interesting his last name's Poorman, because my understanding of the origin of that name, because I have ancestors who were Poorman, is that it was a German name, Burman, originally. So to see a Native American with that, or a Native Canadian with that name is interesting.
1894, the then-named Department of Indian Affairs made it mandatory for Indigenous children to attend Canadian boarding schools. The hope was that these schools would sever Indigenous children from their roots and culture through forced conversion.
I got hit like everybody else that spoke the language here.
These children were subjected to various forms of abuse, and it's estimated that up to 30,000 died.
An Indigenous community in Kamloops, British Columbia found more than 200 likely graves of children who were forced to attend a boarding school for Indigenous kids. The next month, 751 more were found in Saskatchewan.
If true, that would account for 20% of all of the children inside the system. It also led to intergenerational trauma, with many communities suffering from high rates of PTSD, alcoholism, and self-harm. The Nubian...
So, United States had the same sort of thing. Places like, I think, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, there was a school for Native American children during the Plains Indian Wars in the latter part of the 19th century. Same sort of thing. The intentions were I don't think the intentions for these whites who were doing this were like, they weren't thinking like actively, oh, we want to destroy their culture. I think they really thought they were helping by assimilating these people into white culture. In hindsight, we know better. But I think for a lot of these people involved in this stuff, at least in the American situation, the intentions were good, even if the actions were not. And it doesn't excuse it. And I don't know enough about what happened in the Canadian situation, but I know this was a pretty common thing, was to turn natives into good European white people, so to speak, and to assimilate them into that culture. So life in the minds of the people doing it would be better for them, which we know it wasn't. Not to destroy a person's culture. That's never what's best for them.
Dynasty.
From the very first moment that Kush appears in history, around 2000 BC, it was powerful.
In the 8th century BCE, King Piye of Kush, a kingdom located in what's now Sudan, invaded Lower Egypt, founding a new dynasty of Egyptian rulers.
From its prime position on the Nile, the Kush Empire controlled trade routes from the south up to Egypt, transporting ivory, leopard skins, precious stones, and gold.
Their reign lasted for almost 100 years, until they were pushed back into Nubia in 656 BCE. However brief it may have been, the Kushites created the largest Egyptian empire in centuries. Not since the New Kingdom ended in the 11th century BCE had Egypt and Kush been united. The Nubian dynasty successfully blended Kushite culture with ancient Egyptian practices and revived the construction of pyramids for deceased rulers.
In Sudan, in fact, there are more pyramids than in Egypt. And this is a thing that people don't think of very often.
Before we continue...
So it's interesting, and I guess probably some of the reasons why we don't talk much about that is because if they're talking about only about a 100-year time period, in the grand scheme of the Egyptian empire, that is a tiny piece, because we don't really stop to think about just how long Egypt was a power. And this being like in that 7th century BC, you're coming pretty darn close to the end of Egypt as an Egyptian power and the replacement of that with Greek power, with the Ptolemies, which include Cleopatra, who is Cleopatra the Seventh later on. So I understand why a time period like that would not be something that is well remembered in the grand scheme of the thousands of years of Egyptian history.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Hey, do the same for this channel if you like what you see, please. Thank you.
You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. The Toba eruption.
Toba? Not familiar with that one.
74,000 years ago, we may have teetered on the brink of extinction. A supervolcano known as the Toba caldera complex in Sumatra, Indonesia, exploded, depositing blankets of ash for thousands of miles.
The eruption lasted between 9 and 14 days, spewing out ash and rock at a rate of 1 million cubic meters per second.
Now I'm just going to pause and say there's no way we could possibly know for sure how long that thing erupted for, because we don't have written history 74,000 years ago. Written history really goes back, what, about 5,000 years, really? I mean, that's 6,000 years at most. I mean, that's really all we have. I know that scientists are probably estimating this based on their best evidence, but that's all it is an educated guess.
In fact, glass shards from the explosion have been discovered in Africa. It's theorized that this may have led to a volcanic winter that drastically reduced the human population. This population bottleneck may have consisted of just 3,000 to 10,000 people. The theory is disputed, but if it's correct, we're all descendant from a very small group of survivors.
What we can say for sure is that some humans lived through that particular apocalypse, and we're here today thanks to their survival.
And you know, there have been some really massive eruptions. I mean, Krakatoa, which is also in that region of the world, which happens in the 1880s, is a prime example of just a massive event. We know Mount Vesuvius, that happens in the 1st century AD, all of those sorts of things. And they have an impact not only on history, but on the climate, and because of they have impact on the climate, they have an impact on history. Because when the climate is affected, everything is affected. So interesting. What would you add to this list? A major historic event that people just don't really talk about, or people don't know much about. Put it in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts. I'll throw up a link here at the end if you want to check out my visit to Andersonville. And I want to give a shout out to Hunter Adkins in Maryland and Blake Stratton in California. Thank you both so much for your support on Patreon. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.